I had a blood clot in my eye that just burst.
See, you went blind to get more hits on the show.
The medical department do not injure players.
I can remember Steven Gerrard getting an epidural. That's for childbirth, isn't it?
Nicky Butt took a throw in, and I saw about 3 balls coming at me.
I used to look at a lot of my teammates in the treatment room with a lot of disdain, if I'm being totally honest. Sometimes I'm thinking, I think you can play.
Because he's on loan from Arsenal, who does the medical care for him?
Do physios cover their arse a little bit?
You're looking at the scans and you're like, to be honest, mate, we think you can play.
The fans, you just, is he injured again?
There are actually some managers who think the doctors as well, aren't there?
Well, yeah, there are.
Some doctors who think they're managers. Welcome to a new episode of The Fan Debate, brought to you by Sky Bet, and we're delighted to be joined by our special guest, physio and sports scientist, Russ Hayes. Well, Russ, put me right and tell me sort of, your background and what's going on.
Yeah, so I've been a physio for sort of 20 plus years. Worked in the NHS like most do initially, and then moved into the MOD, so worked for the military for 6 or 7 years, all musculoskeletal, which is sort of sports injuries, orthopedic related injuries. Really enjoyed that, got to work with some sort of really privileged people. And then my wife, met her at uni, she's from Manchester. We travelled north, settled, and got invited into United. Worked initially as an academy physio, sort of casual as you do. Worked up through every age group, and then sort of my last job really before I finished was working the reserves for the last sort of 6-7 years, and looking after the players that were sort of transitioning from the reserves into the first team.
Mm. Scholes, at Manchester United, paths didn't cross now at any stage?
No. I think I worked with, Tom Hughes. So remember Tom, he did, and Meza.
Meza, yeah, of course. Meza, yeah.
Yeah, so, Dava, and obviously Huffy.
Meza, Dava,
Meza,
lights
yeah.
Good
I do remember them, yeah.
Scholes, I'll ask you then, first of all, because we probably came through when sports science sort of started becoming a big part of it. Because I always remember when I first started at Liverpool, the first day I joined Liverpool in terms of full-time, so just left school at 16, go to Melwood every day. Yeah. That was the first time Liverpool had ever employed a physio every day, at the club. So that was sort of mid-90s. So, I mean, how was it for you at sort of, probably the cliff in those young days about, sports science, physios?
Yeah, there wasn't much of it, to be fair. I think I was early 90s going into the cliff full-time. If you're injured, Jimmy C, he used to put a biscuit tin on you, like a little machine for 15 minutes. So you had to come in the morning, 9 o'clock, 15 minutes.
Had he switched it on?
Might as well not have done. And then a little bit of ultrasound. It's, I've got a baby in my knee. And then you came back at 12 o'clock. Yeah. You never did any rehab, you never went in the gym, you never did any running. It was when you'll know Dave Fever, won't you?
Yeah.
Dave Fever first came to the club, it all started all of a sudden, because it was quite easy to be injured early, you'll know that, Jamie. And all of a sudden it became quite difficult. So it's amazing how much the injury room emptied once it became quite difficult. But yeah, look, it's changed, and then sports scientists started to come along with the physio. I didn't like that, I didn't like sports scientists. No, because I just wanted to go out and kick a ball, and doing warm-ups in the gym, and afterwards, I just want to play football, I don't need all this. And do you know what? We see that many injuries these days. There's that many sports scientists and doctors and physios at our own clubs. I don't ever think there were that many when we were playing.
Well, you know what I used to say? My dad used to run an amateur football team. So when I was a kid, I used to go and, watch the Merton Villa. These are my heroes. I'm only 4 or 5 or 6. I must have been watching them for, say, 4 or 5 years before I started going to the Everton game. No one ever pulled a hamstring. Yeah. So I used to come in and speak to the physios and these sports scientists and say, why doesn't anyone ever pull a hamstring? They don't do a warm-up. They're on the ale the night before. They're going on the ale after it. And we're pulling hamstrings left, right and centre. Russ, come on, fill me in. How was it work?
Yeah, hamstrings. The rates of hamstrings have increased over the last sort of 20 years. That's for sure. I don't want to bore you with too much of the research, but a guy called Jan Ekstrand, he did a study that looked at 21 seasons. He published this sort of research in 2023. And he looked at the rates of hamstring injury, and essentially had gone from 12% to 24%. And they also looked at the numbers of or the burden, the injury burden, and that's the sort of number of days away from playing or training with that injury, and that's also essentially sort of doubled. So hamstring injuries, without a shadow of doubt, have increased.
But is that, it can't be more games. I don't think we're playing more games in terms of the numbers. Is it just the actual intensity of football now has just gone through the roof and bodies can't cope?
I think so. I think you're right. I think intensity has definitely changed. Also in terms of high-speed running, that's increased. Sprint distance has increased. So players are having to run faster for further. So, and that's clearly having an impact in terms of rates of injury.
Well, what were the changes that you saw then in terms of sports? So we're talking about it from a player's point of view, but I mean, how did it change for you on the other side of it in terms of sports science almost being as big a part as the football club as anything else in some ways?
Yeah, it's a funny one really, because my background has been sort of military and the essence of hard work, brotherhood, you know, and these sorts of themes are really important in sport as well. And I think that also has a sort of impact on dressing rooms and perception of injury. And, you know, I've seen where players are disgruntled and injuries are then sort of, you know, so much worse in their mind. And that's when it comes down to your relationship with the player, you know, your relationship as a clinician, as a physio, as a doctor, as a sports scientist.
I was just going to say, Russ, I think mentality is a big thing when people get injured. You know, say a lad does an injury, does an hamstring, and a physio tell him, look, it's 8 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever it was. My attitude was always, when I got injured, I never pulled a muscle, never did a hamstring, it was always more knees and ankles. And the first thing I wanted to know was, what have I done, obviously? How long is it going to be? And then my mentality switched to, right, I'm going to beat it. I'm going to get back before it. I'm going to break it by 2 weeks, a week, whatever it is. And I can imagine I was a pain in the ass for the physio, because I was always going in every day saying, okay, come on, what am I doing today? Can I step up to the bike? When am I going outside? I don't see that in many players these days, you know what I mean? It's hard when you're not around it. I think once you say 12 weeks hamstring, that's it, they're taking 12 weeks, and I'm not coming back before that.
I think, you know, you can't cheat Mother Nature. So there is a physiological period of time for healing to occur when you can then, you know, once that's complete, then you can start to incrementally sort of...
Aren't we all different in that respect, though?
We are, but there's sort of general sort of periods. So when they sort of say, you know, that's a grade 2 medial collateral knee ligament injury, that's probably going to be in the region of sort of 6 to 8 weeks or whatever. You know, you can give sort of rough approximations, but yeah, there is variation between different people. You're absolutely right, and a lot of that comes down to mentality and you know, the person, characteristics of the person. You know, sport, for me, it's a survival of the fittest, like it is in the military. You know, so you know you come in. And depending on how driven you are, the further you go. It's the same with sport. So, you know, and I think that is something that you have to try and tap into and sort of nurture in injured players.
Do physios cover their arse a little bit? Do you know what I mean? When a manager comes to say, look, how long is it going to be out? You tell him 8 weeks, but you think it could be 6.
So, well, I think I've seen it before. You know, they may embellish it a little bit. You know, because sometimes it's better to err on the side of caution than sort of say, no, he'll be ready for you in 6 weeks, you know, and then he's back in 7, you know, then you know, that can have a sort of an effect on your relationship with the manager. And these relationships are really important. You know, when injuries occur, no one wants injuries to occur, but it's a byproduct of the game that we play. You know, exposure, if you're out playing, you're getting exposed to injury. So injuries will happen. It's how we sort of mitigate injuries from happening.
I'm a little bit like you. I was always like that, trying to cheat when I could get back by. And I had a really old-fashioned view of injuries, to be honest, because I never got injured. Yeah. And I used to sort of look at a lot of my teammates in the treatment room with a lot of disdain. If I'm being totally honest, sometimes I'm thinking, I think you can play. And I know not everyone was built the way I was built and brought up, but I actually think now, I don't know if it was the same for you at United, but certainly at Liverpool, if you had a player who was injury prone, and everyone will know, the fans, you just, is he injured again? You know, but I actually think even though now social media is so toxic, I do think there's a greater understanding when I see I see a lot of Liverpool fans on social media, how they react to certain players when they're injured. And I think it wasn't like that 25 years ago when I was playing. It was just if someone was injury prone, it was just, it was like, everyone just wanted to kill him, didn't they? Yeah. You know what I mean, for missing games. Now it's a bit like, oh, he's unlucky, he's a bit... I mean, I'll ask you that, Gareth, because I see that a little bit like, say, someone like Joe Gomez is injury prone, and you feel for them. Yeah. And I feel them because I had my son having similar situations, a few years ago, injury-wise, and I sort of understand it a little bit more. Do you agree with that from a fan's point of view? There is more understanding about, sports science and the red zone or players getting brought off at certain occasions?
I think there has been, yeah, because that thing you mentioned there, the red zone thing was a big thing under Klopp, wasn't it? And we knew that the players were categorised red zone, amber and green, whether they could play or not. We've had, unfortunately, quite a few injury-prone players as well, so we've had to get used to it. But it's definitely changed just in my lifetime of going the match. I mean, I can remember you breaking your leg at Blackburn and still trying to play. I can remember Steven Gerrard getting an epidural and playing, which was mad. When that came out, I was like, that's for childbirth, isn't it? And he's having that to go and play footy. So I feel it feels like there is a more understanding about it now, and perhaps more of an understanding at the clubs as well. I mean, I spoke to you before, didn't I? And I was saying to you, that epidural situation, even Jamie trying to carry on with a broken leg, do you think there's better care for them now, where you would maybe talk the player out of almost this like masculine thing of, no, I've got to play through every injury and I've got to be the man? Is there more an arm round now saying, well, actually, you might do yourself more damage there?
I think there's sort of medical and legal accountability, definitely. And this is a sort of serious side of sort of medicine and technology. And, there's been huge improvements in terms of imaging. So, 10, 15 years ago, the levels of detail that when they do an MR, the levels of detail are totally different to what you see now. You see, very, very fine detail. And so I think that's also, part of the issue. So previously, 15, 20 years ago, they may have been playing with, a grade 1, a grade 2 injury, muscle injury. Now, because it didn't really pick up on the MR or they weren't scanned, now we sort of scan everything, and quite quickly we can see, well, yeah, you have got a muscle injury there. It looks like it's bled. Not, maybe it's not a structural injury, but there's definitely, a change there.
Russ, what's the relationship with managers? Because something that really stood out for me when we brought Gerard Houllier in, obviously 25 years ago or so, was the relationship with the physio and the doctor, and where it was almost like at loggerheads over different players, and how much of that is a fight now. And it almost feels to me like sports science has won that fight in terms of, you could... I'm thinking of head injuries. I'll use an example now. You have the concussion stuff now. I got knocked out at Arsenal, and the game was on a Sunday, and our next game was on the Saturday. And obviously I've come back around in the dressing room, and I just remember a buzzing in my head just for the days after. But our next game was on the Saturday, and it had to be a week supposedly. And I was just like, our doctor was saying, you've got to wait a week. And I was just like, having none of it. I was playing. And Kenny's like, Lisa, well, you're playing if you want to play. And that was the end of it. There was no I didn't train all week. I just walked around, just played on the Saturday. I mean, that situation wouldn't be able to happen now, would it?
That certainly wouldn't happen now because, for one, if you have a head injury, your capacity to make decisions is impaired. So you may say, I'm playing...
I play as well on the Saturday.
Yeah, so... Yes, concussion is a huge thing at the minute, and it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger as more research is done. The more we understand the effects of concussion, both short-term and long-term effects. I think that's the most important thing, long-term effects of having a head-related injury and having a succession of these injuries. So if you get knocked out, there's a very high chance you'll sustain another injury. It might not be another concussion, but you can get another concussion if you play. But you may get another injury non-related to the concussion.
But the concussion one, I suppose that's almost black and white now, isn't it? That's almost like that's almost like feels like a real. Say that was a hamstring injury, and someone, would that still be in the hands of the manager and the player if you were adamant that someone wasn't ready to play?
Do you know, if you've got conflict between your manager and your sports science and your physio and your medical team, then you're in trouble. You're in big trouble because it's not a space where you can have that sort of level of disagreement. It's about, nowadays, working practice is about collaboration. And I get it. there has to be a final decision made, but it needs to be a collaborative decision where everyone sort of offers their piece of the jigsaw, and then you can see what the jigsaw looks like. You can see the picture presented in front of you. And the biggest part of that jigsaw is the player, because if the player doesn't want to play, he won't play. And that's really important. That's when it comes back to these relationships you have with people. And you've got, for me, it's about relationships. You've got to have trust, transparency, honesty,
patience sometimes.
Patience, and you've got to there's so much pressure in the modern day game on everyone, but you've got to just filter that out. If you want to truly return players properly, you've got to filter it out, and you've got to focus on the needs of the player, and they've got to be able to speak to you and trust you and give you honest information, because you're saying you want to, you said earlier earlier that you wanted to play, so yeah, there's always a drive to play, and you wanted to get back 2 weeks before, we'd sort of said, and that's obvious, that happens, and that's what makes you, and that's what makes you so successful, because that drive to sort of perform, that drive to sort of play.
Flav, sorry, Scholes, you just need to bring Flav in. I mean, you're a club.
Yeah.
This season's probably known as having so many injuries. Have you got a question or any thought process about the setup at Tottenham, or how maybe Ange plays? Does that contribute to it?
Yeah, I mean, so I've got a couple really. Ange Postecoglou's known to bake in injuries into his system. He's said that. He's been on record where is at Celtic that he understands that injury is going to be a part of his approach to football. There's that, but there's also, I wanted to ask a question about Van der Ven and how they're bringing him back, because he played for 45 minutes of football, came off. We haven't seen him for a couple of weeks since then, and they've talked about retraining the way, or his approach, or the way he moves on the pitch to potentially prevent any further serious hamstring injuries. Could you tell us a bit more about that? How that might be a...
So first, the answer to the first question.
What he baked into his approach?
Whenever you get a change in manager, then you have a change in coaching philosophy and intensity of training sessions. There used to be a saying, you train hard, play easy. But I think with the change in the modern game, every game is a tough game. But in terms of when a new manager comes in, then players have to get used to how the manager trains. And so if the intensity suddenly ramps up, so you get spikes in load, high-speed running, sprint distance, then players will take a period of time to accommodate to that. So you typically get a rise in sort of injuries. I think when Van Gaal came in, he was very much, I remember looking at the injury board, and he liked a lot of repetition, and we picked up quite a lot of sort of groin-related injuries. But I think there is a period of accommodation, but you should sort of, be well and truly through that now. And in answer to your second question, players coming back, really, really challenging, and that's where it's so important that you've got incredible relationships with all the staff and the player and the manager, in terms of very delicately, especially with hamstrings or re-injuries of hamstrings, reintroducing them, and the load has to be tapered right. For me, the way I used to sort of manage hamstring-related injuries, I would probably keep them a little bit longer, which frustrated the player, but then it came down to educating them. And I would always, so I'd look at their sort of general sort of GPS profile, and I would always exceed every sort of metric by 15 to 20%, not just once, but over a period, before I felt that they're in the best possible position. But going back to playing match play is totally different to training, totally different to being on a rehab pitch with the physio. And that's another element you got to sort of factor in.
I think Jamie, my point was, I think the relationship between the physio and the manager is probably one of the most important ones in the club, really. I remember we had Owen Hargreaves, who, very unfortunate, great player. He'd have played along with England, brilliant player, Owen, but he was injured a lot, and the manager eventually they become frustrated because they can't get him back, and I'm sure. And our manager was really good in that way. He always trusted the physio. He took their word, as gospel, really. But I remember one game, I think we were playing Arsenal at home. Owen had been out for quite some time, was nearly coming back, and then always breaking down. And I think it was against Arsenal. He went out for the warm-up, and he came in, said he felt his hamstring, and you could just see the anger in the manager's face, the frustration. You're playing, and that was it. Yeah. obviously it didn't end that well. Within 15, 20 minutes, I think Owen was actually off and out for a long time again. So I think that relationship and trust, there has to be frustration from managers as well.
And we're all human, and frustration is part of it. So it's being able to have those open conversations. If you can't have them, or you sort of shy away from them, that's again problems.
There are actually some managers who think the doctors as well, aren't there?
So there are.
Some doctors who think the managers.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
James, have you got a question?
Can I just ask Scholsey a question?
Oh, sorry, go on.
Remember that game against Blues when you took the bang to the head?
Yes, sir.
Against Birmingham City, you took a bang to the head and
Yeah.
you lost your eyesight and you're out for a big chunk of the season. What was that like, discovering that, not having... Were you proper blind in one eye?
No, I did actually take a bump to the head. It was about 10 minutes ago, and I remember, I think I just looked into one of the floodlights and my eyes went funny, and Nicky Butt took a throw in, and I saw about 3 balls coming at me. But I just kicked the middle one. And anyway, I didn't think anything of it. I told the physio and the doctor afterwards, and I went to see a specialist the day after, and apparently I had a blood clot in my eye that just burst. So I just couldn't see it, and that was the longest I was out. I was out for 3 or 4 months.
The rest of the season, I think.
Yeah, 3 or 4 months. I came back for Roy's testimonial against Celtic, just to play half a game to try and get back into it. Yeah, but it wasn't even a bump. It was a little bit scary, yeah.
What was it like having to go through that? Because it's almost like, I remember Giggs used to have issues with his hamstrings and he just starts doing yoga and kind of, but with an eye injury, you go blind, especially someone that...
I didn't really go blind. It was just a little bit of blurred vision. Well, it was a lot of blurred vision at the time, and it'll never go.
See, you went blind to get more hits on this show.
Scholes' blind nightmare.
You know what? When I was going through it, there was a player in Scotland who was blind in one eye. He was actually playing.
So have you still got an issue with it, or?
I think so. Well, it's still there, my eye. But they say you just get used to it, and it took ages to get used to it. But yeah, I think.
So you played blind?
No,
played in the Premier League blind.
When you look at the results, you might...
Some of it passing, yeah, you might think so. No, just a little bit of blurred, a lot of blurred vision. It's like having a migraine. I don't know if you ever had a migraine. It was like that, but for 4 months. Sorry.
I find the psychological aspects of injuries really fascinating, and like we've heard Jamie and Paul talk about how they're that sort of classic footballer type where they wanted to beat the time span, get back as soon as possible. Do you ever have the inverse of that, where you've got players who, you're looking at the scans and you're like, to be honest, mate, we think you can play, but they're saying, I've got pain or I've got an issue, and what do you do if you find yourself in that situation?
It's tricky. Yeah, again, that comes back to your relationship with players. And I can't sort of labour it enough. It's really, really important because even, I was saying about the advent of technology in terms of MRI and diagnostic imaging, and it's much, much better, but it's still not perfect, So there may be, we call it subclinical, there may be something there that we're not seeing, but it's clearly impacting on the sort of the focus and attention of the player because they're not happy, So, and it's a tricky one because we could sort of say, well, yeah, there's nothing there, looks pretty clear, get out and train. So they go out and train and then they pull a hamstring. So then, I told you, and then your relationship is totally gone. It's about knowing your player. That's really important. Having knowing what they're like, knowing what their characteristics are like. Are they a warrior that will sort of run through a brick wall? And if they are, then that sets the alarm bells off more so than somebody that is probably less inclined to be like that. So yeah, knowing your player, good relationships, good communication.
Do you know what I didn't like sometimes when players, especially you probably had it at your club, Jamie, foreign players, when they got injured, they used to fly off. What's wrong with our medical stuff?
That's tricky.
That's a big thing now in all through the Premier League. Players have their own physios, medical staff, personal trainers. That must be very difficult when you're inside the club to keep control of that.
It's a disaster, and that may be a key contributing factor to rates of re-injury. That's not published. There's no evidence for that. It's just my own opinion, but it's really hard. Sir Alex wouldn't have any of that. Or very rarely there was. I think there was 1 or 2 that were sort of made the exception. But
Cantona and Ronaldo.
Van Persie, wasn't it? I think.
But no, there's a few that he let go back to his own country and get treatment. Yeah, no.
But it's hard.
I always felt where's the confidence in that? And I think, maybe it's just to go back to a bit of nice weather, I don't know. But
There is probably that,
Yeah.
and that probably helps, definitely
I'm saying
psychologically.
when a player's come back, can't help, can it? If
No, it
it's
can't, and it's
two sets of
continuity
medical
care.
staff looking after him.
Totally. So if you go and have, you go to the NHS and see a consultant, and you see someone the next time, someone the time after that, it's a disaster. You need that continuity of care. You need that relationship with that player, with that person.
Sarah, you got a question?
Yeah, it sort of carries on from what you were just saying there. So we've got Reece Nelson on loan from Arsenal at Fulham at the moment. Pulled up with his hamstring just before Christmas and came back, did his first training session, and then he's now done his other hamstring, and he's now needed an operation, and he's probably out for the rest of the season. So it's sort of the first injury, could that have exacerbated the second injury that he's now had? And also, because he's on loan from Arsenal, who does the medical care for him? Is it Arsenal or is it Fulham or would it be joint?
So that's a discussion between the two clubs, really. So they will sort of speak to the players, speak to the club, and obviously Arsenal have got sort of overriding control, so they will decide what's most appropriate. Probably liaise with the player to sort of determine that. So in terms of injuries. Sort of spoke about Tom Hughes before. So Tom was a physio at United 15 years. He did a really incredible piece of research looking at prognostic factors. So again, it gets a bit sort of scientific. So looking at prediction factors in relation to injury. And you're saying about, is he more likely to get, an injury because he's had an injury. And Tom looked at all the sort of data at United over many seasons, and he found the only two factors that would predict future injury were age of the player, so the older you are, more likely to get injured, and previous injury. So if you've had a history of injury, and it sounds, we're all sitting here and probably going, well, that makes sense, it's common sense, but all the other sort of metrics we look at, there's no link in terms of prediction of injury. And he spent years on this piece of work, and he did it properly. I think, again, other problems with research is, people quote different studies, but if the research isn't done properly and it's not robust research, then, where methodology, research design is done perfectly, you really can't judge and you can't accept the sort of findings of the study. Tom's work is absolutely solid. So, they're the two factors that predict injury, age and previous injury.
Russ, can you tell us about the Howden Report?
Howden Report, yeah. So it's an insurance-based report for the Premier League. It looks at sort of looks at numbers of injuries and over sort of each season, basically, and offers a bit of a comparison. In terms of injury rates, it looks at that. Cost of injury is another thing, financial cost to the club. So it gives you a sort of indication on that.
How much does an ACL cost the club?
Average, well,
A lot.
You going to chip in?
Well, maybe.
20 odd grand, I reckon.
We just had Dragon.
cost of surgery or cost of
total
club?
cost of the club, yeah.
Well, it's difficult because I can't give an exact figure because the longer the injury, probably the higher the cost. But you factor in wages and all that sort of stuff. But as an average, an injury in the Premier League will cost the club about £350,000 as an average.
How much are injuries down to genetics? You look at the people like Luke Shaw now, who just the lad can't stay fit. And also another part of the question: when you're signing a player, you must, you definitely take into consideration his previous injuries. And I look at Mason Mount for us, Adam. He didn't play for such a long time. I'm sure he played towards the end, but he missed a lot of it.
The clues were there as well. He was an injury-prone Chelsea player.
Yeah, that's my question. How much is it down to genetics?
Yeah, how much is it down to genetics? I think there's a component, definitely. Injuries are multifactorial. Someone pulls up a hamstring, you can't say, well, it happened because they played, 90 minutes sort of 2 days ago or whatever. It's multifactorial. There's so many factors that go into the pot that cause an injury to happen, and we're only talking about sort of non-contact injuries. Contact injuries are, that's totally out of your control.
Did you deal with Luke Shaw while you were there?
No, John Davin dealt with him. I got a bottle of champagne off Luke Shaw for being late consistently, though.
You were late consistently.
No, he was late. He was late.
I was going to say,
I was going to say, yeah, you got a bottle of champagne.
He was late. Buy me a bottle of champagne.
What do you think his issue is then? What's John Daver told you?
Well, he told me you never warmed up. That's what he told me.
I was never injured.
Well, exactly.
Yeah,
So exactly. So, and that's the thing. That, you know, when we talk about genetics, you know, you never warmed up. Someone.
You know, once you've been injured that many times, or for so long, do you think it has to be mental, a lot of it, does it? But it's very difficult for a physio or someone to prove that, isn't it?
It's really hard. But yeah, there's definitely a component of psychology. You know, anyone sort of that suffers bad news, we've all received bad news. And when you tell someone you're not going to play for 9, 10, 12 months, that's the world destroyed, isn't it? So, you know, it's really hard how people manage and cope. And it's a process. It's almost like a bit of a bereavement process when you get a big injury. And it's, again, sort of catering to that.
See, that's where I thought our mentality was probably right and helped in that way. When you say bereavement, and even if I was never out for 10 or 12 months, so I don't know how it feels, but if I got told I was out for 10 or 12 months, I'd be thinking 8 months, I'll be back. Yeah. And that was like a win.
The day I broke my leg, Gareth was talking about Milan Barros broke his leg in the same game. But he broke his leg before me. And our doctor went with him to the hospital. I don't know if I've told this story on this before, but when I go into the office, I'm with the Blackburn doctor, who was actually employed by the FA at the time. So my dad comes, Lucas Neal's broken my leg, he's been sent off. He comes in, my dad comes flying in, because he knew I wouldn't go off unless it was something serious. What the fucking hell's happened? Just goes with a bad tackle. So the doctor's in there, and he's going, oh, he's got away with one. He's a lucky boy, you know what I mean, and all that. So they're laughing and so not having a bit of banter, I'm fucking lying there like that. So our doctor's not there. So I then, crutches, on the coach, everyone's going, oh, you were lucky, it was a terrible tackle, all that stuff. So I just get home that night, and I go kip on my front, I sleep on my front, but I'm like, me leg, it's just like it's got a heartbeat in it. And I'm just on my back like that, because I can't get on my front. I goes, it's the first time I see our doctors the next morning. He looked at me for 10 seconds and went, you broke your leg. So I didn't know I broke my leg until the next day. Because when you talk about, like, you know, medical, whatever, people, expertise or whatever, our doctor wasn't there. So I didn't realise until the next day. But the point I'm making is, because Barros had broke his leg at the same day, for me it was a competition. Yeah, I'm going back before him. Yeah. You know, it was just, and it was just, I was told it was 6 months. I got back in 4 months and played my first reserve game against Everton at Hague Avenue. Yeah, but that was my thing when you talk about how people deal with it. Yeah. My thing was like, is he running or is he jumping or is he training? Yeah, it's like, I've got to beat him. I've got to beat him.
Did you get back before Barros?
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, it just goes to show the relationship you have with, how close the relationship is with the medical staff, because if your doctor was seeing it, he would have probably said, well, I know Jamie. You know, that's definitely, you know, that's clearly a fracture. This is not like him. The other guy, the Blackburn doctor, the FA doctor, no relationship probably with you, doesn't really know what you're like, you know, and you rely on...
He couldn't spot a broken leg either, could he? Forget the
bone sticking out.
Could have gone to Specsavers, maybe.
You're lucky.
Did you ever sleep in the oxygen chambers? I know Rooney had to for a while, didn't he?
Oh, we had them at the club. We had the sort of enriched
You don't sleep in them, do you?
No.
I thought, like, oh, I'm sure you saw.
No, you lie down in them. You lie down them, but you don't sleep in them.
Right.
Okay. We'll cut that bit out. Lee, have you got a question?
Yeah, it was actually funny about Rooney and Beckham.
What, sleeping in?
No, it was more like the gear that they wear the last 30 years. The football boot has got smaller and smaller and lighter and lighter. And you also look at like shin pads nowadays. They used to be like, in the 90s, they were like these big, thick things. Now they're like literally like that.
Yeah.
Does that
upset me? Yeah, it does really upset me.
Do you get more injuries because of the...
We got a lad in, you know, playing in the first team at United now. He's a lovely kid and I got on really well with him. But, you know, he would wear the smallest shin pads and he had a sort of contusion. It kept him out for, I think, 5 weeks. It was a really nasty one. And I'm trying to have a conversation with him. So I'm saying, this is, you've lost 5 weeks. 5 weeks of your development. 5 weeks of an opportunity in the first team, you know, because you're wearing this sort of gear, you know, and again, it's, you know, trying to listen to their rationale for using it, but ultimately, yeah, it's about sort of risk and mitigating risk all the time. Shin pads, boots, you know, playing surface, you know, there's so many factors.
It's because players nowadays want to get an edge now. They want to get ahead by feeling light, running quicker, as you say, the
I get that.
acceleration.
I get that. You know, that feeling, and if you don't feel right, it doesn't feel right. It'll be in the back of your mind the whole game, and you won't focus on what you need to focus on. So it'll be a distraction. But I don't know. Sometimes society today, it's about, there's always something, and at the end of the day, strip it right back. You're there to perform at your best, and getting into that mindset of that is really important, and having people around, emphasizing that point. I think often there's too many distractions, there's too many voices, there's too much nonsense, and that impacts on performance, in my opinion.
That's a good point. There is, from me and Jamie, so when we were playing, there's probably one physio, if you were lucky. And now there's so many people. There's so many people around the football club. You might have 2 or 3 physios, you might have 2 or 3 sports scientists. And I always feel like when you're in the morning, maybe having a massage, there's always somebody to complain to, isn't there?
There's a lot of work.
There is always something to say to somebody.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to do, and that's fine. It doesn't necessarily matter if you have more people, but everyone has to be on point with the same information. And that's what it comes down to, sort of creating a culture where there's a togetherness and everyone is imparting the same information. Problem happens where I give a piece of information, somebody else gives a different piece of information. It starts to create distrust, a bit of disharmony, because I'm like, well, why are you talking, why have you said that?
How much of a problem is that when we look at clubs, and I'm thinking of Liverpool here, because I don't necessarily think Liverpool are a million miles better than they were last season, but the players are fit. Players last season were injured a lot. Now there's a slight different sort of shift maybe in style, with Klopp a little bit more sort of gung-ho end to end. I mean, when there are injuries at a club, who's almost getting the blame? It almost feels like there's a blame game if there's injuries. Is it the style of play of the manager? Is it the medical staff? How do you see that when you're looking at your own club, but also other clubs as well?
Joe, it's one of those things that really sort of annoys me, because you constantly, a player gets injured, or they have a club will have a problem with injury, and the medical department are to blame. The medical department do not injure players. They're the ones that pick them up, put them back together. If you got a problem with re-injuries, then yeah, that is worth a discussion. But medical departments up and down the country through the Premier League do not injure players, and keep harping back to it. It comes back to those relationships with people. You can be an incredible physio, but if you can't talk to people, you're stuffed, And for me, that's really, really important. You've got to be semi-all right at what you do as a physio, but you've got to be, absolutely world-class at talking to people, building relationships with people, building rapport, and delivering good messages. Other things that really bothered me when I'd go into the training ground is, if the treatment room is flat, right, it just creates, a low mood. You don't want anyone in that treatment room, but people get injured. You got to lift them. You've got to get them going again, and you've got to give them a target to get them out. And often I see treatment rooms where it just feels, dead. And that's the problem.
The treatment room's always that room in a football club. You might come in early, or you might be in the canteen. You don't know where everyone is, and you just go to the treatment room. Everyone will be in the treatment room. It's just that room where everyone just sort of. And I always remember someone describing it as the room of truth. There's always that relationship. Like physios and sports science, they find out everything. They're sat on the bed with the lads and they're just chatting away. Masseurs, they build that relationship. Masseurs, sports scientists. It feels like, I always think you've got to be, I'll be honest with you, I always think you've got to be very careful with medical staff in terms of...
Telling the truth.
What you're saying to him,
If I went into management, we talk about a bad dressing room. I think if you get a bad treatment room and you've got a couple of physios or a masseur who are they've got negativity, just planting seeds into players' heads. They're negative people, and it's just, I don't fancy him, or what do you think about the manager? Oh, I can't believe he did that. And I think it can be the best of places, but it can also be a cancer in a football club.
100%. And I've worked with people in the past where they've sort of looked at a player for a certain injury, and they've sort of gone, oh no, actually this is out, that's out. I need to sort of readjust that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Do not say that. Do not say that. Concentrate on his injury, get him back out. You start to put seeds of doubt in players' minds, and it's a problem, because that will play on the players. Well, I didn't perform very well in training because I've got, this is sort of derotated. I need to sort of, I need to go and see him. And then there's a dependency, and that's another problem, dependency between player, athlete, and sort of clinician.
Trust, there has to be a trust as well, don't you? As Jamie said there, as the player, you're going to be spending a lot of time with this physio, and you might sometimes tell him stuff that you probably shouldn't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? About things that maybe happen in the dressing room or things you aren't happy with. And then there's that concern, is this going to get back to the manager? You know what I mean? So there has to be a big trust between the physio and the patient as well.
That's sort of medical in confidence. So, that's you're ethically bound to not just, if you had a discussion with me, then I am bound, not, by my sort of discipline, not to discuss that with anyone else or impart that information. But you don't want to get to that stage. You want openness and transparency. So you want, I'd be having a conversation with you and sort of saying, well, this what you're saying is really important information, and you need to sort of disclose that to the boss, to the manager, because it's going to impact on his selection choice, and how he manages going forward. So you're absolutely right, and football can sometimes be the most unprofessional professional arena for clinicians, and I think that's where clinicians need to be really careful. It's important to have relationships with people, and it's important to have fun and banter, but you've got to deliver on what you're there to do.
When City won the treble, we had almost every player, maybe not fully fit, but available for the final. How much of it is down to luck? Because when I think back about that season, we were pretty lucky with some of the players that stayed fit. De Bruyne had a hamstring injury in the quarter-final against Bayern Munich and still kept playing. And then it was only in the final where it completely went and he had to come off. So how much of it is down to luck and can you think of any particular seasons, maybe at United, where they've been very lucky or unlucky?
I could do the latter part. De Bruyne, for example, he played on with that, and then he suffered the consequences of that for months and months and months after. So luck is a part of everything. You get in the car in the morning to come here, and you hope you're not going to crash. That's the analogy. So you put your seatbelt on. You've not had any beers before you got in the car. You've put your phone away. You're concentrating on driving that vehicle. So you're mitigating risk, and I think it's about risk mitigation. But the best teams, the most successful teams, they're the ones with sort of consistent availability. Players available to play. That's proven.
Well, Russ, I want to say a big thank you for coming in and joining us on the Fan Debate. And that is another episode of the Fan Debate brought to you by Sky Bet. See you next time.